Okay, so I guess the opening statement there is that there is no perfect formula when it comes to record keeping. And I know when I was in extension, that was a question I got asked many, many times. What's the best way? What's the best way? But it really comes down to what's going to suit you. And from an LPA perspective, it doesn't really matter the method that you use, as long as that you are capturing all the information that is required. So that that you have the information there if you do get audited, and you have the information there that backs up that quality assurance. I guess the other important thing is that LPA is not about you keeping two sets of records. Like if you're already keeping paddock books and you've got a system, you've got Excel spreadsheets, or you're using on-farm software, that you don't go and say, oh, look, here's the LPA templates, I need to fill them out as well. If you can modify what you're doing to capture all the information that you need for LPA, then do that. Or conversely, if you don't have a system, then have a look at the templates and see, you need to capture that information, but can you modify them or, add to them to maybe add some information that you also want to keep just for your own farm management. So it's not about having, this perfect set of records. It's just for LPA. It's about how do you make that part of your everyday, the stuff that you do and that you're going to be recording anyway, and just have it as in the easiest way for you and what suits you. So as we've said a few times, that if you are asked to participate in audit, that's what they're going to be looking at mostly is your records. So it's really important to make sure they're accurate and up to date. And I guess we really don't want people to think, I only need to do this if I get audited, so I won't worry about it until then, because it should be part of your everyday. It should be what you're doing to be part of the system, and what you're doing to sort of maintain that integrity for the industry, and not just in case you get audited, or not just when you get an audit notification. So we do have templates, as I've mentioned, and they do have all the, they are set up so that you capture all the data that you need. And these templates are available on our website. So you can see that there on our little integrity insight on the screen, the website address, but don't worry about writing that down, because we are going to provide that for you. You can order a hard copy through the LPA website, or you can just download it and print it out, or you can, if you want to, take the template and then create it, the same columns and information in Excel, if that's easier for you. So as I mentioned in the introduction, one of the things that has been added to the LPA website, so everyone who has an LPA account can log in, and there's a whole lot of stuff you can do in there apart from just doing your accreditation. So you now can store your records online in your account, which is a really great thing, because it means you can get yourself organized, you can get things done, you can store your records in there. So, if you do get a notice to be audited, then you've got most things already done. It's all there in one place. And I guess something that has sort of happened since COVID, and it was going to happen anyway, but COVID kind of accelerated it, is we've started doing remote audits, which means that, people can, or producers can, participate in audit without having the auditor having to visit their farm. It just means that they can upload everything into their account, and it can be reviewed there, and then they can, it's quite a painless way. You don't have to allocate a day or half a day to drive around or sit down with an auditor as he goes through all the stuff in your filing cabinet. You can just provide the examples that demonstrate what you're doing into your account. So that's one of the key things of why that has been set up in your LPA account. And importantly, we'll talk about this in a bit more, is that your property risk assessment and your farm biosecurity plan can actually be completed digitally. So for all the other records, you need to save a copy and upload it, but these ones, the risk assessment and biosecurity plan, can actually be completed digitally. So there's like a process you just step through and enter your information, so it's really easy. And when we're moving on in that same, talking about those two records that we're saying you can do digitally, the risk assessment and biosecurity plan, they are actually a property management type of record. So They're something that you probably do once and review annually. So they're not something that you need to, you're doing on a daily basis. And that's why I've kind of talked about the different types of records there are for LPA. Are those management type records that, you sort of look at them and make sure you've got them done. So that includes the animal welfare part. And then your operational records are sort of more of your day-to-day records that you would be keeping in, some other format, and you would just need to upload examples of those if you did get audited. So now we're actually getting into the 7 LPA requirement areas, and we're going to talk about the records that you need to keep for each requirement area. So a property risk assessment is all about you managing risk of chemical contamination or food safety risks on your property. So to make sure that animals that you're selling are not going to be contaminated with a chemical or a physical contaminant, you need to go through this process. And, most people know what the risks are on their property, but it's a good idea to have a good think about, is there anything else I haven't thought of? And part of the process is that you complete a risk assessment and you complete a map. So you don't need to go and make a new map. If you've already got a map, you just mark on that map where those risks are. But if you're audited, the auditor would like to see where the risks are on your property map. You do need to, as I said, review these things. You might do it annually. You might do it once, but you do need to review it annually, because if anything's changed, you might have bought more land that adjoins, or you might have had something else happen, and you just need to make sure that you're still accounting for every risk that's on your property. You do need to document and file the risk, and as I said, if you do that online in your LPA account, it's there. It's never going to get lost. It's always available. And yeah, we'll look at that in more detail. So this is a map, and I appreciate that your properties are generally very large, and this is quite a map of quite a small property. But if you do have an existing map, then and you've got a mapping program, just add your risks onto that map. So you do need to identify where they might be, such as a tailing dam. You might have old dips. You might have had old houses and machinery painted in lead paint. You might have a dump that's not fenced, all those kinds of things. So you need to identify those risks. And you need to say how you're going to control them. So if you do have a rubbish dump that's not fenced, you do need to work out how you're going to control that. And obviously you do need to make sure that livestock cannot get into there. If there's stuff in a dump, and most dumps would have a potential for some kind of risk. But just listed, they're just examples of what property risks could be on your property. Tailing dams, public and adjacent public land is definitely one that you might have if you've got public road going through your property and you have people camping and leaving rubbish behind. Getting a flat battery and leaving it on the side of the road is just a real issue, because lead poisoning is something you can get quarantined for. Obviously your livestock can die from that, and you don't want any of those things to happen. So thinking about those risks and how do you control them, and it's not always easy, especially in extensive situations, but it is important that you consider those risks and how you're going to manage them. The second sort of key property management record keeping is having a biosecurity plan. Now, I know a lot of you would have thought about this or created one when the Yoni's management came in, and also when LPA required you to have a biosecurity plan a couple of years ago. So, and I know a lot of people think, oh, what am I doing this for? No one's ever going to come and look at it. Well, it's not meant as a plan for other people. It's meant as a plan for you. How are you managing your biosecurity risks? The auditor will look at it. They're not going to, assess it for its ability to protect your property. They're just going to assess it to say, have you actually considered the risks and considered what a biosecurity plan needs to be? But you do need to have a biosecurity plan, because it's part of showing that you have systems in place to minimise the risk of infectious diseases being introduced into your livestock and into the livestock chain. and that, you know, if you've got systems in place, then that's going to help stop the spread of diseases. Biosecurity plans obviously also cover things like weeds, and even though that's not what LPA is about, we're not about, you know, making sure that your property is weed free. It is an important part of biosecurity plans, so you may as, you know, if you're going to do one, it's a great option to use that. And I'm not sure in the territory, but definitely in Queensland, where we had like gas lines and a lot of mining activity and railway lines and things like that going through, producers did find that if they developed a documented biosecurity plan, they were serious about it, they followed what they said they did, then they could be a really useful document if you're trying to manage access by other people onto your property. So this is what our template looks like. And as I said, this is one of the records that you can complete completely online, and it's a really simple process because you just type in each box and, you know, work your way through typing in the information. So, you know, one thing would be really important is that you know the emergency animal disease hotline number, because, you know, we're all need to be vigilant about disease. Foot and mouth is, you know, the key one, but who knows what other things, you know, we've just had a major pandemic and we didn't know about that disease a couple of years ago. So we really do need to be vigilant and be aware, and make sure that your staff also are aware. So if you're not there and they see something a bit odd or strange, they know what the procedure is. And that's what a biosecurity plan is. It's just a way of managing that risk and showing that you're prepared for something that may, you know, that may happen. Part of biosecurity is managing, as far as practical as you can, practicable is managing access. And so we have a template for, you know, visitors to your property. Again, you need to use this as it sort of applies to your situation. And it's really about, is there risks in terms of the visitors that are coming onto your property? And if there is a risk, as in, you know, they've just flown in from overseas, I know that won't be the case at the moment, but, you know, how are you managing when people come into contact with animals, and are they coming from other properties and having contact with the animals? And if that's a risk, it's important that you keep a track of that. So the third record keeping area in the sort of the management area is the animal welfare. And I do remember last year when we did this webinar, sort of, it was a bit of, it wasn't as well known that this is part of LPA. So if you, I would encourage you to log on to your LPA account, because when you log on, if you get a little alert straight up on your screen saying you have not completed the animal welfare module, then that's really important. That's something that you need to attend to, because part of your LPA accreditation is completing the animal welfare LPA learning. And when you do that, you are issued with a certificate to say, you know, you've gone through that process. And basically that learning is based completely on the guidelines, Australian Animal Welfare Standards and Guidelines, on those documents, and you can access that through your LPA account. We've also got the link there. So it's really important you do have access and that you have read these standards and guidelines, and that your staff have read it and aware of it, and that how you manage your livestock is in line with what the standards and guidelines say. And they're really clear and simple. They're not, it was a really huge task to get these developed and sort of harmonise or have a sort of national set of standards and guidelines. And they did it. I think they've done a good job in terms of making them very simple and easy to understand. And there are requirements in there around the use of pain relief at certain ages. And it's just, you know, you do need to be aware and across it. And you have agreed that you will manage your livestock in accordance with those standards and guidelines, but when you sign up to be part of LPA. And that's just an example of the certificate that you are issued when you do complete your LPA learning on animal welfare. So now we're getting into like the daily or the more sort of operational record keeping. And the first one of these is the safe and responsible animal treatments. And these records are really important so that you are documenting and filing all the treatment details. That it is important too that you've done a chemical, some kind of chemical user training. I'm not sure in the territory if you have sort of an organisation that comes through and regularly does those, but usually your state farming organisations and your state Department of Agriculture, you know, can make you aware of when those courses are available. But it is important, and it may be in your legislation that you need to have done that. You do need to keep a track of, you know, when you've cleaned and calibrated your equipment that you're using. You need to definitely have record any authorizations and directions for off-label use of chemicals. So if you, you know, using something that's not actually registered, but your vet's given you permission to use that, and you know it's in writing, you need to keep that. Physical contaminants like broken needles must be recorded, so those animals need to be identified. And the big one is HGPs. So it's really important that you do mark animals that are treated with HGPs with the ear punch, and you have good records, and you can, you know, identify those animals. So the integrity insight on that slide is about the length of time that you need to keep records for, and it does vary because if your state legislation has a requirement that's you need to be aware of, otherwise it's a minimum of 3 years, or the length of the time that you have livestock on your pick. So whichever of those timeframes is the longest is what you need to do. So just check up on what your state legislation says, but otherwise if you've got MBDs coming in for incoming animals, or you've got records for animals that you're still alive on your property, you need to keep them until you no longer have those animals. Livestock treatment records can be kept on the LPA template, and that's an example of what that template looks like. And you know, you may be keeping these records in a paddock book, you might be keeping them on Excel spreadsheets, but just make sure that you are keeping all of those details. So you do need to have the date, the description of the livestock, the name of the product, the batch number is really important. What rate are you using the product at? What is the withholding period, and what date are those animals going to be safe for slaughter, and who was doing the treatment? It is a pain capturing sometimes the batch number and expiry date, because you know the product might go out in the shed, or might go to another outstation, it might go to the yards, and it's not there anymore. So one little trick someone suggested was getting your supplier to put that batch number and expiry date for the product you're buying on the invoice. So then if you need to, you know, you want to fill in your book, keep filling your livestock treatment records, you've got it there in the office or on your in your email. So it's not, you don't have to go looking for it. So the chemical inventory record is the other record keeping template you need to fill out with regards to your chemicals. And again, you can get that, you know, information off your invoice if you've asked your supplier to put it on there. And it is important to keep that inventory, because that sort of keeps you, it shows that you're managing your chemicals, shows that you're keeping track of, you know, if they're coming up for expiry, that you are going to make sure that they're disposed of and not accidentally used, because there has been some, you know, poor outcomes from people using chemicals that are out of date. And so it's really important that you're keeping a good track and you're really managing your chemicals on your property. So I'm not sure, you know, how many people are, you know, farming or treating fodder and growing their own fodder and treating it with chemicals. But this requirement is all about making sure that if you are buying in fodder, or you're growing fodder, or you're you know, have improved pastures or whatever, that you're treating those pastures with chemicals, that you are keeping a record of that, because there are withholding periods for that, and you need to have your records about that. So you need to have systems in place to identify if livestock have become contaminated. You need to map those sites that could be contaminated, and you do need to source a commodity vendor declaration for introduced stock feed. So the templates that you would use would be, so for your crop, pasture and paddock treatment records, you do need to keep all this kind of information, which is important to keep anyway, in terms of if you trying to keep a track of what you're spending and what you're applying to if you're growing something. But it does, you know, the important thing is this: when is it safe to be harvested or grazed? But all the other information does need to be kept as well. If you are treating grain and fodder, then you do need to also, this is a template where you can keep records of what if it's been treated and when it's been treated and when it's safe to feed. And if you're purchasing stock feed, and this isn't like, you know, the pre-made stuff, this is like if you're buying grain or you're buying pasture hay or hay, you do need to get a commodity vendor declaration for that, because basically you just need to know, was that crop or grain treated with anything, and if and they would give you that declaration to say no or yes, or when it's safe for it to be used for livestock fodder. Again, feeding out, if you're feeding out that stuff, you need to keep a record of it, because if there is an issue, then you need to know what mobs had access to that feed. This is an example of a commodity vendor declaration, and it's perfectly fine for you to print one out and take it to your supplier and say, I really need this for my records. Can you please complete it? And it's not about them saying it's free of weeds, or, you know, which a lot of people are not happy to fill in because they can't guarantee that, but it's about, has the fodder or pasture or grain been treated with chemicals, because that's what's important for food safety. So we're moving on to the next area, which is preparation for dispatch of livestock. And the big important message here is about fit to load. And hopefully you've all seen the updated fit to load guide, which is now Is the Animal Fit to Load? And it has the photo standards, and it has sort of like the information about how to make a decision if something is fit to load and fit to transport, which is, I guess, a big consideration for you guys, because your animals are generally traveling a lot further. And often, you know, with times to spell in between. So it's really important that they are able to make those journeys and strong and able to, you know, free of any issues that might cause them pain. So it's also important that you record the details, including the vehicle registration and times, and that you are documenting and filing your NVDs, and that there's records of any animals which may have been exposed to physical contaminants, because that does become an issue in the food chain. So this is a template on how you can keep some records about preparing your animals for transport. You know, when were they, what livestock were they, what were they, date and time of yarding, and the date and time of dispatch, just so that you have that recorded. But that information also is generally on your NVD. So the key sort of message we have about NVDs, and I think I mentioned this before, that they do need to be clear, so they have to be legible, you have to be able to read them, you have to be complete, so everything has to be answered, and they must be correct. So double check that information and make sure that it is all correct. So the questions for the big part of, you know, part A, there's a whole heap of questions there that you need to answer. So there's the information about the livestock and where they're going, but then there's a series of questions that you need to tick yes or no. Now, don't tick yes and no, because people tend to do that if they've got a mixture of animals that it both applies. So you have to tick, this is what stay on the safe side means. So if some of the animals have, you know, been, anything that applies to them, then just tick yes, and then it will apply to the entire consignment, but you need to stay on the safe side. And especially with HGPs, if you have any concern that any of the animals may, you know, there might be one or two in the whole consignment, then you just need to tick yes, because that way it's not going to end up in the wrong supply chain. NVDs have a declaration, which I'm sure you're aware of. So that is the part where you're declaring that everything on that NVD is correct, and it does make it a statutory declaration. So that's why it's so important to make sure you have got the right information, and that you have the farm records that back those statements up. Now, we do have the ENVD option, and I'm not sure if you've tried using an ENVD, but I think I would really encourage everyone to try it, because with the change to and the introduction of the new ENVD last year, if you need an NVD in an emergency, there is no such thing as an emergency NVD anymore. An ENVD is the emergency NVD. So you can access this anytime through your LPA account. You can generate it. You don't need a token. You don't need to buy tokens. It's not the EDEC. It's free. It's easily accessible. Now, at the moment, they are working really, really hard on the next step is complete offline accessibility, because you know, even if you have good internet at home, and at home might be a long way from the yards, or when you need to move cattle, it's obvious we've had that feedback that you know, that's made it difficult for people if you're in that circumstance. So the next big thing they're working on is offline capability. So at the moment, though, you still can print 3 copies. Most of it can be completed, so you can print it with like most of it can be completed after it's been printed. So that's not holding you back from using it. So I would encourage you to give it a go. It is definitely faster and easier and more accurate than using the paper versions. It does ensure that you're using the correct version of NVD. So if there's anyone that didn't have, you know, they suddenly realize I don't have the latest, you know, the book in this truck is the old version, I need the new version. This is how you can access it in a hurry. There's lots of benefits from using it. So as we talked about before, NLIS records are a part of the of what you need to do for LPA. So you must record your livestock movements onto your PIC on the NLIS database to remain LPA accredited. And if you are asked to participate in an audit, the auditor will be reviewing all your transfers on the database to make sure that they have a corresponding MVD and vice versa. And apart from that, we've popped into the integrity insight box there. Your state legislation also does require that that you are completing those transfers. So there might be penalties from their perspective if you're not doing it. But I guess the thing from an LPA point of view is, you know, if you want to stay accredited, then you need to be doing these things. So the livestock and purchases recording, so you need your copies of your MVDs, you need to do your NLIS transfers, and you do need to keep a track of those purchase and movement. So here's the template for, you can fill in for when you're bringing stock onto the property, and here's one for moving stock off the property. So again, you can use these printed templates, or you could have your own system for keeping this information, as long as you have a way to show that you have records of what's been happening. So we've been talking quite a bit about audits, referring to audits, what's involved. So the most important thing is don't panic, because they're not about, you know, trying to catch you out. They're about trying to help you identify where are the areas that you might need to improve. And yes, the main part of an audit is looking at records. So that's why we keep saying, you know, keep them up to date. Don't leave it until an audit notification to think, oh, I've got a lot of stuff to catch up on. Trying to keep things up to date all the time, and then you don't have to worry if you get an audit notification. So there are about 3,000 random audits conducted each year. And if you, you know, you really can't refuse to participate, because that could lead to you being withdrawn from the program. And as I said before, you can actually, there is the option now to complete these audits remotely. And that process involves, you know, submitting your documents into your account. Reviewing your on-farm practices against the audit checklist. So this is the checklist. This is an example of the checklist. It comes in your audit pack, so it gives you an opportunity to go through that and to make sure you are, you know, doing everything that you need to be doing. So if you do get an audit notification, you know, read through the information carefully, because it has pretty much got everything there that you need to make sure that you're prepared for the audit. If during an audit there is something that is a significant issue is found, then the process is the auditor could raise a corrective action request. And basically this is just saying, okay, look, we've identified that you're not doing what you need to be doing here. So this is we've requested you to put this in place, and here's the date that you need to have that done by. And now actually you can manage that whole process through your LPA account. So you'll have a corrective action sitting there. If, for example, in this situation, the example that's on the screen is that they didn't have a biosecurity plan, then they've been asked to, complete a biosecurity plan, and to close that corrective action, they need to upload or complete the one online, or they need to complete one, scan it, take a photo of it and upload it into their account. And the auditor would have a look at that and said, great, you've completed the request I've asked you, and close that corrective action request out, and then you can, your accreditation is not affected. So that you can access that how to fact sheet on our website, but we'll be giving you a link to that as well after the webinar. So there's lots of links and tips and tools that we've referred to, and they all will be made available to you. But obviously, if you're searching out stuff, please have a look at our website, because there's a lot of stuff on there, and also on the LPA website. So I do encourage you to log in and have a look, and especially have a look at that online record keeping, because it could save you a lot of time. We also share information via email, and if you're not receiving our Integrity Matters newsletter, then I encourage you to sign up for that, subscribe, so that you get that sort of monthly. It's been going out, so it keeps you up to date. And one of the important messages we had going out last year was that change of the NBD, so it was really important tool for getting that information out. And obviously we're across all the normal social and digital platforms, so we're happy to talk to people across those channels as well. So just finally, I'm just a disclaimer on that, the NVD is your declarations. We can't do it for you, but we are here to help you. So yeah, I hope you've got something out of all the information that we've presented, and we'll definitely have more information for you on that follow-up, the follow-up email that comes after the webinar.